There are connections that seem to be written on some invisible layer of reality. They appear without warning, but with a force that defies any apparent logic. It is as if, when looking at the other, something profoundly familiar awakens within us. Not merely attraction, but a call to wholeness, to what Jung would call the reunion with forgotten parts of our psyche. When we are destined to love someone, the universe sends us subtle yet powerful signs. These signs are not magical or mystical in a superficial sense. They are reflections of the dance between unconscious and consciousness, of the quest for completeness that every human being carries. It is not just about romance, but about transformation, about living mirrors that lead us into the journey of individuation. True love is a summons to the soul. If you believe that love is a path of self-discovery, write in the comments, "I am ready to see the signs." For Carl Jung, true love is not just an emotional or romantic experience. It is, above all, a profound psychic phenomenon that awakens unconscious content and reveals hidden aspects of our being. When we feel strongly drawn to someone, often we are projecting onto him or her the unintegrated parts of our own psyche, especially those Jung called anima and animus, the archetypes of the inner feminine and masculine. To love in this sense is to recognize in the other a symbolic extension of ourselves. The signs that we are destined to love someone arise precisely when that person touches, consciously or unconsciously, psychic regions we have not yet known or accepted within ourselves. Many times this attraction does not stem from superficial affinity, but from a profound symbolic impact, something that transforms us, challenges us, reveals us, and in some cases, even dismantles us. It is the beginning of a process of individuation, the Jungian journey toward wholeness. The shadow, a central concept in analytical psychology, also manifests in these encounters. People we are inexplicably drawn to may represent repressed or rejected aspects of our personality. The romantic encounter then becomes an invitation to integration. Instead of projecting onto the other what we do not accept in ourselves, we are invited to recognize and embrace it. To love someone from a Jungian perspective is like crossing a mirror. We see in the other not only who they are, but who we might become. And the signs of this crossing appear when the unconscious awakens, in coincidences, in dreams, in intense emotions, and above all in the sense that the encounter is not casual but essential. There are moments when we meet someone and feel an immediate, deep, almost inexplicable connection. It is not fleeting excitement nor simple physical interest. It is as if something within us has been touched by an ancient, familiar, almost archetypal presence. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious is able to recognize patterns and symbols long before the rational mind processes any information. When we are destined to love someone, it is often the unconscious that perceives it first, and it manifests through visceral sensations, symbolic dreams, synchronicities, and an insistent intuition that the encounter has a greater meaning. This kind of recognition does not happen by chance. It is closely linked to what Jung called archetypes, universal structures that live in the collective unconscious and shape our most fundamental human experiences. Among these archetypes are anima and animus, which represent respectively the feminine aspect in a man's psyche and the masculine aspect in a woman's psyche. When we meet someone who deeply resonates with these inner archetypes, the sensation is one of reunion, not only with the other but with something essential within ourselves. That is why this type of bond does not necessarily depend on time or cohabitation. In seconds, we may feel closer to someone than to people we have known for years. This is because it is not the logical mind that leads this recognition, but the unconscious, which operates in a symbolic and emotional dimension. In this context, it is common for synchronicities, meaningful coincidences, to occur, indicating that the encounter has a specific role in our journey. It may be a dream that precedes the meeting, a recurring thought, or even a sensation of déjà vu when standing beside the person. Furthermore, the unconscious tends to express itself in altered states of emotional perception. When we are before someone who has a transformative role in our life, we feel an intense emotional openness, sometimes disproportionate to the circumstances. Jung believed this is due to the activation of psychic complexes, clusters of unconscious emotion and memory, that emerge strongly when the psyche recognizes that the encounter may open portals for our inner evolution. True recognition is not always gentle. At times it comes with fear, unease, or resistance. The rational mind tries to find excuses not to dive into the bond, but the soul insists. This happens because the depth of the encounter demands inner transformation, and the ego, with its defenses and patterns of control, naturally fears losing its domain. It is at this point that love ceases to be merely a feeling and becomes a summons to self-knowledge. When this kind of connection arises, it should not be seen as mere coincidence or the product of chance. It is a sign that the unconscious is guiding us toward an important stage of the individuation process, the path of becoming who we truly are by integrating all aspects of the psyche. The other, in this scenario, becomes a symbolic mirror that reveals hidden parts of ourselves. That is why the sense of destiny or mission that accompanies these encounters is in fact the echo of an inner language, older and deeper than thought. To recognize someone with the soul is to perceive that the encounter is filled with meaning, even if we cannot immediately explain it. When this happens, it is essential to listen to intuition, observe the signs, and allow ourselves to dive into what is being revealed. The soul sees before the mind because it inhabits the subtlest layers of reality, those that are invisible to the eyes, but revealed to awakened consciousness. This is where true love begins, not as a logical choice, but as a response to an inner call. The soul recognizes, the body feels, the mind resists, but destiny insists. In the field of relationships, Jung invites us to understand that we rarely see the other as they truly are. What we perceive, especially at the beginning of a romantic involvement, is a mixture of who the other actually is and what we project onto them. Projection, one of the most fundamental concepts in analytical psychology, is the mechanism by which we cast onto others unconscious parts of ourselves, repressed desires, unacknowledged traits, ideals built by culture, and above all, archetypal symbolic content latent within the psyche. This is why we often feel irresistibly drawn to someone without knowing why. What is being activated there is not merely interest in a specific person, but the emergence of inner content that finds in the other a channel of expression. The other becomes a symbolic mirror, a container for our inner images. Jung emphasized that in such moments, we are not really loving the other in their real totality. We are in fact in love with an inner image projected onto them, and that image may contain both light and shadow. In the realm of love, the most powerful projections involve the archetypes of anima and animus. The anima, as representation of the inner feminine in man, is often projected onto female figures who evoke intense emotion and fascination. The animus, the masculine principle in a woman's psyche, manifests as idealizations of strength, wisdom, or mystery in the partner. When these projections occur, the sensation is of reunion with something profoundly necessary, as if the other completes a missing part of our being. It is at this moment that many believe they are before their soulmate, not because of who the person is, but because of what they symbolize internally. However, over time, projections begin to wear off. The other shows who they truly are, with their imperfections, limits, choices, and contradictions. What was once idealized becomes challenging and often disappointing. This moment, which for many seems like the end of passion, is actually a crucial turning point. Jung said that true love only begins when projection ends. When we can see the other in their individuality, outside the symbolic frames created by our psyche, we have the chance to build a more authentic relationship based on the real encounter of two whole souls, not on the union of complementary fantasies. This process is painful because it demands self-responsibility. It is easier to blame the other for not meeting expectations than to admit the expectations were inner projections. But it is precisely in this confrontation that the potential for transformation lies. Love ceases to be just a mirror and becomes a bridge, a genuine connection between two individuals who recognize each other in their humanity and not merely in their symbols. Jung did not see projections as negative in themselves. They are in fact the beginning of the process. What makes the experience mature and conscious is what we do after realizing we projected. The partner, by returning or frustrating these projections, gives us the opportunity to integrate them. What was cast outward can be reintegrated into consciousness as part of who we are. Love then becomes a catalyst for the individuation process. To see love as a mirror is to understand that every intense attraction, every conflict, every enchantment or disappointment points to something about ourselves. The other is not there merely to complete us, but to show us, with clarity and depth, where we stand on our own inner path. And it is this reflection which, when accepted with humility and openness, has the power to transform us. Destined love, in this context, is the one that compels us to look inward. It is the relationship that exposes our shadows and our lights, our illusions and our truths. It is the experience that reveals, in both symbolic and concrete ways, that to love another is also, and perhaps above all, to love the process of becoming whole. Love, when it is true and deep, does not limit itself to feeding our idealizations. It also digs, reveals, and exposes. Jung teaches us that the most transformative relationships are those that directly touch the shadow, the part of our psyche that harbors everything we reject, hide, or cannot accept in ourselves. In a meaningful relationship, especially one we feel as destined, the other inevitably becomes a mirror not only of what we idealize, but also of what we avoid confronting. The shadow, according to Jung, is not only the set of negative or destructive characteristics of the personality. It also includes repressed potentials, stifled creative impulses, unlived desires, and authentic traits that were annulled so we could fit into social, family, or cultural patterns. In a romantic relationship, the partner has the ability to activate this shadow, whether by provoking us with actions that irritate us disproportionately or by stirring insecurities, jealousy, or deep fears. It is at this point that many people feel the relationship has become difficult or painful. In truth, what is happening is an intense activation of the psyche, a call to consciousness, to integrate aspects that were previously unconscious. The discomfort that arises is not only caused by the other's behavior, but by the clash between the image we have of ourselves and what is being revealed through the bond. The other becomes a portal to our own inner world, and that portal, at times, leads into the darkness we have avoided facing. That is why true love is not always light or effortless. Many times it is challenging, disconcerting, even disturbing. The partner shows us our limitations, our automatic reactions, our contradictions. And far from being something negative, this process is profoundly necessary for individuation to happen. The other confronts us with parts that must be seen, welcomed, and integrated, parts that, alone, we might never have had the courage to face. This dynamic also reveals why we feel such resistance in some relationships. Sometimes we reject the other, not because they are unsuitable for us, but because they activate in us contents we are not ready to handle. And in other cases, we remain in harmful relationships precisely because our shadow is so intensely engaged that we lose clarity over what is projection and what is reality. This is why self-awareness is essential. It is necessary to ask oneself constantly, what in me is being touched? Which part of my shadow is surfacing in this encounter? To recognize the shadow in the relationship is an act of courage. It requires humility to admit that the discomfort we feel often speaks more about our own psyche than about the behavior of the other. This does not mean tolerating abuse or denying another's responsibility, but rather understanding that every intense emotional reaction carries a message from the unconscious. Anger, jealousy, hurt. All these feelings can become paths to deep revelations when examined in the light of consciousness. Romantic relationship then becomes a psychological workspace. It is there that we can, with willingness and honesty, see who we truly are. When love is destined, it does not simply comfort us, it forces us to grow. The partner becomes both the challenge and the mirror, the provocateur and the guide. Pain, when understood, becomes strength. Conflict, when worked through, becomes learning. And the shadow, when integrated, ceases to be a threat and becomes a source of authentic power. Jung said there is no enlightenment without facing darkness. In love, this means we only become capable of living a full and true bond when we are willing to confront what we avoid. Relationship ceases to be an escape and becomes revelation. And in this process, we discover that the other, by showing us our most fragile parts, also gives us the chance to be whole. From the Jungian perspective, The ultimate goal of psychic life is individuation, the process by which we become who we truly are, integrating light and shadow, reason and instinct, conscious and unconscious. This journey is deeply personal, but it does not have to be solitary. On the contrary, some romantic relationships, especially those marked by symbolic and emotional depth, can become true catalysts of this transformation. To love someone in this context is no longer merely to live a bond of affection. It becomes to actively take part in one's own spiritual and psychological evolution. When we are before a love that feels destined, what is at stake goes far beyond compatibility or superficial affinities. This kind of relationship awakens in us the impulse to become more whole. The other is not just a partner. He or she becomes, consciously or not, an agent of healing. This does not mean the relationship will be easy or free of challenges. On the contrary, the challenges are an essential part of the process because it is precisely through them that we are led to see what must be healed, developed, or redefined. Individuation as a couple begins when we stop expecting the other to complete us and instead see them as a mirror and a companion on the journey. This change in perspective is fundamental. To stop seeking in the other the solution to our needs and instead recognize that they help us see where we are incomplete is a leap in emotional maturity. True love is not the one that fills our voids, but the one that shows us where those voids are and inspires us to fill them ourselves. In this dynamic, the relationship becomes a symbolic space of integration. It is where we can express our vulnerabilities without fear, where the ego learns to yield so that the self, the regulating center of the psyche, can emerge more strongly. Mature love ceases to be a battlefield of control or idealization and becomes fertile ground for mutual healing. This does not mean conflicts disappear, but that they come to be faced as opportunities for growth, not as threats to the bond. Jung believed that the self guides us along paths that favor our evolution, and often, this inner guide places us before people who, even without knowing it, touch exactly the points we need to work on. In destined love, this choice is not rational but symbolic. The other chooses us because they carry aspects that activate deep archetypes, often linked to old wounds that must be integrated. The relationship, in this case, functions as a living laboratory, where our rawest emotions take voice and form, and where we can observe, in real time, the movements of our own soul. For this individuation as a couple to occur, both must be willing to see themselves truthfully. The courage to assume vulnerabilities, to ask forgiveness, to change patterns, and to sustain the tension of opposites is what makes the relationship a field of psychic development. It is not the ideal, romantic, or perfect love that leads to individuation, but real love, the one that allows itself to be crossed by imperfections, ruptures, and reconciliations without losing the commitment to truth. When two individuals walk together in this process, they create something that goes beyond the bond. They create a shared consciousness, a unique symbolic language, an intimacy not based on fusion, but on respect for individuality. Each becomes mirror and ground for the other, and both become more whole through the encounter. The romantic relationship then ceases to be an end in itself and becomes a means to self-knowledge, to the awakening of the soul, to the realization of inner wholeness. In this kind of love, the other is not a prison but liberation, not a crutch, but an impulse. And the journey, though filled with curves and shadows, becomes clearer, richer, and more human. In the end, to truly love someone in Jung's light is to accept the most radical invitation life can make, to become whole, not despite the other, but through them. Love, in the light of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, reveals itself as one of the deepest experiences of self-discovery and inner transformation. When we feel we are destined for someone, it is not a romantic accident, but a symbolic call that comes from the unconscious. To recognize the signs of this love is, in fact, to recognize the movements of the soul, which lead us into encounters that challenge, heal, and awaken us. These are relationships that mirror not only our lights, but also our shadows, opening the path to the integration of what is hidden within us. We project, we idealize, we resist, we suffer, but we also awaken, grow, and become more whole. True love is not the one that spares us, but the one that transforms us. When two individuals meet on this journey with presence and awareness, the bond becomes fertile ground for mutual healing and individuation. If this content spoke to you on a deeper level, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to continue exploring the paths of the soul through Jung's teachings. And now watch the video appearing on your screen. It may be the next step on your journey of self-discovery and transformation.